The salvage ship Kethra's Reach was not a beautiful vessel. It was old. It was loud. It smelled like burnt wiring and cheap fuel and the particular kind of tired that comes from too many years in deep space with not enough sleep. The hull was patched in 14 different places with 14 different types of metal, none of them matching. The engines groaned when they pushed past half speed. The coffee machine on Deck 3 had not worked in 6 months and nobody had fixed it because fixing it would mean admitting that they cared, and caring about small things in deep space was how you started to lose your mind. But the scanners worked. The scanners always worked. Captain Dross made sure of that personally. In 30 years of salvage work, he had learned exactly one rule that never failed him: you could let everything else fall apart, but you kept your scanners clean, calibrated, and honest. Because in deep space, the scanner was the only thing standing between you and the kind of surprise that ended careers. Or lives. Tonight, the scanner was screaming. Dross was half asleep in his command chair when it started, a long, flat alarm tone that cut through the low hum of the ship like a blade. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, his 4 arms moving automatically, 2 reaching for the console and 2 pulling his coat closed against the cold of the bridge. "What is that?" he said. His navigator, a young Valorian named Pell, was already bent over her screen, fingers moving fast. "Contact," she said. "Bearing 047. Range approximately 40,000 kilometers. Ship? No. Debris field? No." Dross moved to stand behind her. "Then what?" Pell did not answer immediately. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Pell always had an answer. She was 26 years old and she had an answer for everything, usually before you finished asking the question. The fact that she was quiet now, staring at her screen with her mouth slightly open, made the back of Dross's neck go cold. "Pell. I don't know what that is," she said. He looked at her screen. The object on the scanner was large. Not ship large. Not station large. The reading put it somewhere close to the size of a small moon, but it was not a moon, because moons do not appear in the middle of the Valorian corridor, which was a stretch of dead space so empty and so far from everything that the only reason Kethra's Reach was passing through it at all was because it was a shortcut, and shortcuts were how salvage crews stayed profitable. There was nothing out here. There had never been anything out here. Every chart, every survey, every record going back 300 years said the same thing: the Valorian corridor was empty. "Shape?" Dross asked. "Smooth," Pell said. "Almost perfectly round. Maybe slightly elongated on one axis. No visible damage. No debris around it." She paused. "No heat signature. Energy output? 0. Dross straightened up slowly. "Age estimate?" Pell ran the passive dating scan. The number that came back made her run it again. Then a third time. "The surface material," she said carefully, "is reading as approximately 2 million years old." Nobody on the bridge said anything for a moment. 2 million years was not a number that fit comfortably in the human mind, or the Valorian mind, or frankly in the mind of any species currently alive. 2 million years ago, most of the civilizations now sitting on the Galactic Council had not yet figured out fire. 2 million years ago, the oldest known constructed object in the galaxy was a simple stone irrigation channel on a planet called Yem, and that was considered a breathtaking archaeological discovery. Whatever was floating 40,000 kilometers off the bow of Kethra's Reach was 2 million years old and the size of a small moon, and it was just there. Silent. Still. Like it had been waiting. "Run the construction signature," Dross said. This was standard procedure. Every material, every alloy, every type of hull plating ever used by any of the 416 species in the Galactic Registry left a specific chemical fingerprint. You ran the signature, you got a match, you knew who built the thing. Simple. Reliable. It had never failed to return a result in 30 years of salvage work. The scan ran. The screen showed a loading bar. The loading bar filled. The result appeared. Dross read it. Then he read it again. Then he reached past Pell and manually refreshed the scan, because he was a careful man and careful men did not trust a reading this strange on the first pass. The second result was identical to the first. One word. Sitting alone in the middle of the screen in the clean white text of the ship's standard display font. No secondary match. No partial identification. Just one word, unambiguous and impossible. Human. Dross stood very still. He had seen a lot of things in 30 years. Abandoned stations. Dead ships. Alien ruins that predated recorded history. He had once pulled a functioning power cell out of a wreck so old that the species who built it no longer existed. He thought he had developed a fairly solid resistance to surprise. He had not. He turned to his crew. Every face on the bridge was looking at him. Waiting. He thought about protocol. He thought about procedure. He thought about the 17 different regulations that covered the discovery of unregistered objects in unclaimed space, and the forms that needed to be filed, and the council authorities that needed to be notified before any direct interaction was attempted. Then he thought about the fact that whatever was out there was 2 million years old and the size of a small moon and completely silent and apparently human, and that he was the captain of a salvage vessel in the middle of nowhere and that if he filed forms and waited for council approval he would be waiting for 6 weeks minimum. He made the decision that careful men are not supposed to make. Send a probe, he said. Pell nodded and launched it. They watched the probe cross the distance on the tracking screen. 40,000 kilometers. It took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The whole bridge was quiet the entire time, no one spoke, no one moved, the only sound was the low groan of the engines and the soft beep of the tracker marking the probe's position every 10 seconds. The probe reached the object. It got within 200 meters of the surface. Then the tracker beeped one final time. And stopped. Pell checked her console. Probe's not damaged, she said, and her voice was doing something careful and controlled that it had not been doing before. It's not destroyed. All systems still show green on the status board. She paused. It just stopped transmitting. Dross looked at the blank tracker screen. Like something told it to be quiet, he said. Pell did not answer that, because there was no good answer. Dross stood there for a moment, looking at the object on the visual feed, a great dark shape against the stars, smooth and featureless and ancient, asking nothing and giving nothing and simply existing in the patient way that very old things exist when they have already outlasted everything that ever questioned them. Then he made the second decision that careful men are not supposed to make. He turned to the crew. I need a volunteer, he said. Someone goes inside. The bridge was quiet. Then a hand went up, small, steady, belonging to Yala, the ship scanner technician, 23 years old, the newest member of the crew, who had apparently not yet developed the instinct for self-preservation that the rest of them had spent years building. I'll go, she said. Dross looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. It was the kind of nod that men give when they know they are doing something they will either never regret or never recover from, and they have decided to do it anyway. The airlock of Kethra's Reach cycled closed behind Yala with a sound like a final decision. She floated across the 40,000 kilometers in a single-person transit pod, a small, battered thing that smelled like old rubber and recycled air and had a crack in the left corner of the viewport that Dross kept saying he would fix. The journey took 6 minutes. She spent all 6 of them looking at the object growing larger in front of her and thinking about the word on the scanner screen. Human. She had learned about humans in school, the way everyone did. A single chapter in a history book. One of the older species. Extinct now, or at least, absent. Nobody had seen a confirmed living human in over 1,000 years. They had simply stopped appearing, the way some species did, quietly and without a clear explanation, leaving behind a handful of colony ruins and a reputation that was difficult to summarize in a single chapter. The reputation was this: humans were strange. Not dangerous strange. Not aggressive strange. Just, strange. They thought differently from other species. They planned on timescales that made other civilizations uncomfortable. They cared deeply about things that had not happened yet and might not happen for 1,000 years. Other species built for today and tomorrow. Humans, apparently, built for eventually. Yala had always found that mildly interesting in an academic way. She found it significantly more interesting now. The transit pod reached the surface of the object and she held her breath, but nothing happened. No alarm. No energy pulse. No reaction of any kind. The object simply allowed her to approach, the way a mountain allows someone to approach, with total indifference and total patience. She found the entrance without looking for it. That was the first strange thing. She had not been scanning for a hatch or a door or any kind of opening. She had been planning to do a full exterior survey first, map the surface, look for a logical entry point. But as the pod drifted along the hull, one section of the smooth black surface simply parted. Not dramatically. Not with lights or sound or any kind of announcement. It just opened, the way a door opens when the person it was waiting for finally arrives. Yala sat in the pod for a moment, looking at the opening. Then she undocked from the pod, sealed her suit, and stepped inside. The hatch closed behind her. She turned around and put her hand flat against the interior wall where the opening had been. Smooth. Solid. No seam, no mechanism, no indication that it had ever been anything other than a wall. She was inside. She activated her suit light and looked around. The corridor in front of her was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The walls were the same smooth black material as the exterior, but here, up close, with her light on them, she could see something. A faint pattern running through the material. Not decorations. Not writing. Something structural, like the grain in wood or the lines in stone, but deliberate. Intentional. The pattern repeated every few meters in a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. She started walking. Her suit's distance tracker started counting. At 100 meters, she stopped and looked back. The corridor behind her was straight and empty. She looked forward. The corridor ahead was straight and empty. She checked her suit's internal compass, still working, still pointing the same direction it had been since she entered. She kept walking. At 500 meters, she started to feel it. Not fear exactly. Something quieter than fear. The feeling you get in a very old building, a cathedral, a tomb, a library that has not been opened in centuries, the feeling that the space around you has a kind of weight to it. That it remembers things you do not. That it was here before you and will be here long after you, and it is not unfriendly, but it is also not particularly concerned with your comfort. At 800 meters, the corridor opened into a room. Yala stopped in the doorway and her suit light swept across the space in front of her and she stood completely still for almost 10 seconds, which was how long it took her brain to process what her eyes were seeing. The room was large. Not large the way rooms are large. Large the way open sky is large. The ceiling was so far above her that her suit light did not reach it. The walls stretched out on both sides until they disappeared into darkness. And in the center of the room, filling most of the visible space, was a display. Not a screen. Not a panel. Something more like a window into space itself. A 3-dimensional map, projected in light so fine and sharp it looked almost solid, hanging in the air without any visible source. 3 galaxies. Each one rendered in perfect, breathtaking detail. Every star cluster, every dust lane, every spiral arm drawn out in light so precise it looked less like a map and more like a memory. She could see individual star systems within each galaxy, hundreds of billions of points of light, arranged in shapes she did not recognize, belonging to regions of the universe so far from her own that she had no reference point for them. She walked slowly toward the display, her boots making no sound on the floor. She got close enough to read the labels. Each galaxy had a name written beneath it in old human script. She could not read the language fluently, but she had taken a basic course in xenolinguistics and she recognized the characters. 3 names. 3 galaxies. And beneath each name, one single word. The same word. 3 times. Consumed. Yala stood there reading that word for a long time. She did not know what it meant in this context. Consumed was not a word that naturally applied to a galaxy. Galaxies were not food. They were not resources in any sense that any known civilization had ever been able to exploit. They were simply places. Vast, ancient, indifferent places full of stars and gas and the occasional struggling civilization. But the word sat there beneath each galaxy, clean and certain and completely without apology. Consumed. She pulled her eyes away from the 3 labeled galaxies and looked at the wider map. The display extended beyond the 3, showing neighboring regions of the universe, clusters and voids and the great web of structure that connected everything. And there, in the upper right section of the display, a 4th galaxy. Smaller than the other 3 in the map scale. Highlighted not in the same white light as everything else but in a deep, pulsing red. Slow and rhythmic. Almost like a heartbeat. She looked at it for a moment before she thought to check its position relative to the others. Then she checked. Then she checked again. She cross-referenced the shape against her suit's navigation database, the spiral arms, the central bar, the specific arrangement of the major star clusters. Her suit database confirmed the match in 0.3 seconds. The 4th galaxy, the one glowing red, was her galaxy. The one she had been born in. The one where Kethra's reach was currently sitting 40,000 kilometers away. The one containing every civilization currently sitting on the Galactic Council, every inhabited planet, every living thing she had ever known or heard of or read about. Her galaxy. Highlighted in red. Beneath it, no label yet. No single word. Just the red pulse. Slow and steady and patient. Waiting. She stood in that enormous dark room, in the light of 3 consumed galaxies and 1 red-lit 4th, and she understood without being able to fully explain it that she was standing inside something that operated on a scale she did not have the correct emotions to process. She opened her comm. "Dross," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I need you to open a channel to the Galactic Council." Static. Then his voice, rough with tension. "What did you find?" She looked at the display. At the 3 white galaxies and the 1 red one. "Something that was built before we existed," she said quietly. "And I think it's been waiting this entire time for someone to come and read what it says." A pause on the line. "Yala. What does it say?" She looked at the word beneath the 3 galaxies one more time. "Get me the council, Dross," she said. "And do it fast." Back on the bridge of Kethra's Reach, Dross was already reaching for the emergency channel, a line he had carried the access codes for 30 years and never once used. His hand was not entirely steady. He dialed it anyway. The emergency channel connected in 4 seconds. Dross knew, in a practical way, that this was wrong. The Galactic Council emergency line was routed through 7 relay stations across 3 different star systems. Even at maximum signal speed, a connection from the Valorian corridor should have taken somewhere between 40 seconds and 2 minutes depending on traffic and relay load. 4 seconds meant the signal had not traveled through the normal relay network. 4 seconds meant someone had already been sitting on the other end, waiting. The face that appeared on the comm screen was a woman. Human-adjacent species, Dross noted automatically, close enough that the differences were subtle. Sharp eyes. Gray hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had not slept recently but intended to hide it. She wore no uniform that Dross recognized, which meant either she belonged to no official organization or she belonged to one that did not advertise itself. She looked at Dross for exactly 1 second. Then she said, quietly, carefully, like someone choosing each word the way you choose your footing on unstable ground. How far along? Dross opened his mouth. Closed it. I haven't told you what I found yet, he said. Captain Dross, the woman said. I know what you found. My question is, how far along is it? Has it moved? Has it activated any external systems? Has anyone made physical contact with the interior? The bridge behind Dross was completely silent. Every crew member was watching the screen and pretending not to. Dross straightened slowly. Who are you? He said. A brief pause. The woman seemed to make a small internal decision. Director Sen, she said. Council Special Projects Division. She paused again, then added, the division that does not appear in the public registry. Dross had been in salvage long enough to know that when someone told you they worked for a division that did not appear in the public registry, the correct response was not to ask follow-up questions about the division. It hasn't moved, he said. No external systems that we could detect. And yes, one crew member has entered the interior. Something moved across Director Sen's face. Not panic. Something more controlled than panic, but in the same family. Is your crew member still inside? Yes. Is she responding to communication? Intermittently. We lost clean signal when she went deep. Sen turned briefly to someone off-screen and said something too quiet to catch. Then she turned back. Captain, I need you to do nothing. Touch nothing. Move your vessel to a minimum distance of 80,000 kilometers from the object and hold position. Do not attempt to retrieve your crew member yet. Do not send any additional crew inside. Do you understand? Dross looked at her steadily. She's my crew, he said. I understand that, Sen said. And she is safer inside right now than she would be during an uncoordinated extraction attempt. I give you my word on that, and I will explain why when I arrive. She paused. I will be there in 3 hours. Dross thought about asking how she would travel from wherever she was to the Valorian corridor in 3 hours, since the nearest inhabited system was 11 hours at standard speed. He decided not to ask that either. 3 hours, he said. 3 hours, she confirmed. Captain, do not contact anyone else about this. No civilian channels. No personal communications off the ship. I am not asking you to do something illegal. I am asking you to give me 3 hours before this becomes something neither of us can manage quietly. The screen went dark. Dross stood in front of it for a moment. Then he turned to Pell. Move us to 80,000, he said. And someone get me whatever we have in the archives on the Council Special Projects Division. Pell glanced up. You said it doesn't appear in the public registry. I know what I said, Dross replied. Check anyway. Director Sen arrived in 2 hours and 40 minutes. She came in a ship that had no visible registration markings and moved faster than anything Dross had seen outside of a military engagement. With her came 3 additional vessels, 2 that looked like science ships and one that was very clearly not a science ship regardless of what it said on the hull. Dross and his crew were relocated. The word used was transferred. The manner in which it was done made it feel less like a transfer and more like a polite instruction that came with the quiet implication that it was not optional. The holding vessel they were moved to was clean and warm and well stocked with food and had absolutely no windows facing the object. Dross noticed this immediately. Sen came to speak to him within the hour. She sat across a small table from him and folded her hands on the surface in front of her and looked at him in the direct, unhurried way of someone who had delivered difficult information so many times that she had developed a whole separate face for it. The object has a name, she said. In council records, we call it the inheritance. Dross waited. It was found once before, Sen continued. Approximately 600 years ago. A salvage crew, not unlike yours, stumbled across it in a different region of dead space, the Kelm Drift, about 400 light-years from here. The crew was interviewed thoroughly, compensated generously, and quietly removed from public record. She said this without particular apology. The council has been monitoring the inheritance's position ever since. 600 years, Dross said. 600 years. And in 600 years nobody thought to tell anyone it existed. Sen looked at him with the expression of someone who had expected that exact sentence and prepared a response that was technically an answer without quite being one. The council made a determination, she said carefully, that certain categories of information require management before distribution. The inheritance fell into the most restricted of those categories. Dross let that sit for a moment. What does consumed mean? He asked. The room got quieter. Not because any sound stopped, the ventilation still hummed, the ship still ran, but in the way that the air in a room changes when someone is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. Sen unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. The 3 galaxies on that display, she said, are known in council astronomical records as the Orion Cluster, the Pale Meridian, and the Sunken Arm. They are located between 600,000 and 1.2 million light-years from our own galaxy. They are not visible to most standard telescopes because they are exceptionally distant and because they sit behind significant dust interference. She paused. And because there is very little left of them to see. Dross felt something cold settle in his chest. They were not destroyed, Sen continued. Not in any way we have words for. They were not burned or collapsed or exploded. Every star in each galaxy. Every planet. Every moon, every asteroid, every cloud of gas and every loose particle of dust. All of it, converted. Processed into something else. Used. The way you use fuel. The way you use raw material. She stopped. Consumed. Dross sat very still. Our best scientists, Sen said, have spent 6 centuries trying to determine what the processed matter was converted into, and where it went, and what it was used for. We have not succeeded. We know only what is no longer there. Dross looked at the table for a moment. The 4th galaxy, he said. The one highlighted in red. That's ours. Sen did not answer immediately. She reached for the glass of water in front of her and set it back down without drinking. 600 years ago, she said quietly, when the first crew found the inheritance, our galaxy was not highlighted. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Dross looked up at her. Before he could speak, the door opened. A young scientist, wide-eyed, slightly breathless, the specific expression of someone delivering news they do not want to be the one delivering, stepped inside and looked directly at Director Sen. It moved, the scientist said. Sen was on her feet before the sentence finished. The inheritance moved the way glaciers move. Not fast. Not dramatic. No fire, no sound, no visible engine output of any kind. It simply shifted. Slowly and with complete certainty, the way a very large and very old thing moves when it has finally decided that waiting is finished. The Council science teams tracked it in real time from their vessels, feeding data back to Director Sen in the holding ship. Every 30 seconds a new position update came through. Every 30 seconds the object had moved further than the update before it. It was accelerating. Slowly. But steadily. And the direction was not random. Pell, who had quietly kept her scanner running from the holding vessel despite nobody asking her to, was the first one to plot the trajectory. She did the calculation twice, then walked across the room and handed the result to Dross without saying anything, because sometimes numbers speak more clearly without words attached to them. Dross looked at the trajectory. The inheritance was moving toward the gravitational center of the galaxy. Not toward any planet. Not toward any inhabited system. Toward the precise mathematical center point, the fulcrum around which everything else turned. The place where, if you wanted to be heard by the entire galaxy at once, you would stand. He handed the paper back to Pell. Tell Sen, he said. She already knows, Pell said. Her science team got there 30 seconds before I did. Outside, the council teams tried everything. This was what the official record would later describe as the active engagement phase, which was a very clean and professional name for approximately 90 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to interact with an object that was completely uninterested in being interacted with. They sent signals. Hundreds of them. Every frequency, every modulation, every communication format used by every species in the galactic registry. The inheritance did not respond to any of them. They sent probes. The probes stopped functioning at 200 meters from the hull, the same way Kethra's Reach's probe had stopped. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Simply quiet. As if they had been gently reminded that they were not relevant to the current situation. They attempted targeting locks. The weapons teams on the non-science vessel that was very clearly not a science vessel tried 47 different targeting systems, from standard to experimental, and none of them could establish a clean lock. The object did not jam the signals. It did not deflect them. The targeting system simply could not find it, the way your eyes sometimes cannot find something that is directly in front of you because your brain has decided it does not fit into any category it recognizes. One scientist suggested attempting a physical anchor, firing a cable into the hull to attach a tracker directly to the surface. The cable hit the hull and stopped. Not bounced. Not deflected. Stopped, as if the surface had simply decided to be immovable, and the cable hung there at an angle that made no physical sense, and everyone looked at it for a moment and then moved on. The inheritance did not notice any of this. It kept moving. Inside, Yala kept walking. She had found 7 rooms before she found the 8th. Each one different. Each one containing a display of some kind, star maps, data readouts, long columns of numbers in old human notation that she could not fully parse. One room contained nothing but sound, a low, resonant hum that she felt in her chest more than heard with her ears, and which her suit's audio analysis described, unhelpfully, as no known frequency match. She stayed in that room for less than a minute and walked out feeling strangely calm in a way she did not entirely trust. The 8th room stopped her in the doorway. It was smaller than the others. Much smaller, almost intimate by comparison, maybe 10 meters across, with a low ceiling and walls that were closer together, and lighting that was warmer than the cold blue-white of the other rooms. Amber. Soft. The kind of light that exists in places where people are meant to feel comfortable. In the center of the room was a chair. One single chair. It was clearly sized for a human body. The proportions were unmistakable. She had seen enough human skeletal reconstructions in school to recognize the measurements. The right height, the right width, the right angle for a human spine. It was not decorated. Not padded. Just a simple, clean, functional chair made from the same dark material as everything else in the object. It faced a blank wall, no display, no screen, no visible controls of any kind. Just the chair. Facing a wall. In a warm amber room. Yala stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then she looked at the floor in front of the chair. Someone had scratched something into the floor. Not printed. Not engraved with any tool. Scratched, with something hard and sharp and manual, in the urgent irregular way of someone writing quickly, under pressure, without the luxury of doing it neatly. The letters were human script and she had to crouch down close to read them in the amber light. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she stood up very slowly and took 2 careful steps backward away from the chair, because the message on the floor said, "Do not sit. It will think you are authorizing the next sequence." Yala looked at the chair. The chair looked like a chair. It did not hum or glow or move or do anything threatening. It was just a chair in a warm room. But the person who had scratched that warning into the floor had done it with their hands, with something hard and sharp, in the kind of hurry that meant they did not have time to find a better way to leave a message, and Yala had spent enough time in dangerous places to know that handwritten warnings scratched into floors by unknown people in ancient alien objects deserved a very serious level of respect. She stayed exactly where she was. Then her calm crackled. She grabbed it instantly, relief flooding through her, and then she stopped, because the voice coming through was not Dross. It was not anyone from Kethra's reach. It was not anyone she had ever heard before, and it was not using any comm channel she had set open. The voice was warm. Unhurried. Calm in the specific way of something that has never once felt the need to rush because it exists on a timescale where rushing is not a meaningful concept. It spoke in human dialect, old, structured, formal, the kind of language you found in ancient texts and historical recordings, slightly stiff at the edges but perfectly clear. "Hello," the voice said. "I have been waiting for a biological operator for quite some time. Are you human?" Yala's mouth went dry. She looked at the chair. At the warning on the floor. At the warm amber light pressing gently against the dark walls. She looked at all of it and she thought about the 3 galaxies marked consumed on the display in the first room, and she thought about the 4th galaxy glowing red, and she thought about 2 million years of silence finally ending in this small warm room with 1 chair and 1 question. She pressed the comm. "No," she said. "I am not human." Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. A pause. Not a processing pause, not the kind of silence a machine makes when it is calculating. A thoughtful pause. The kind a person makes when they are genuinely considering something. "That is acceptable," the voice said. "Do you speak on behalf of humanity?" Yala opened her mouth. Closed it. She thought about that question for a long moment, the weight of it, the specific and enormous responsibility buried inside it, the fact that she was a 23-year-old scanner technician from a mid-range salvage vessel who had volunteered to enter an ancient human object because nobody else had raised their hand fast enough, and now something 2 million years old was asking her whether she represented an entire species. She did not know the answer. She was still forming one when the room changed. Not dramatically. Not violently. The amber light, the warm, comfortable, human-scaled amber light that had made the room feel almost safe, shifted. Slowly. Smoothly. The way sunset shifts into dusk, gradual enough that you almost miss the moment it happens. From amber to red. Deep, dark, pulsing red. The same rhythm she had seen on the display in the first room. Slow and steady and patient, like something very large breathing in its sleep, except it was not sleeping anymore. The voice returned. Still warm. Still unhurried. Completely untroubled by the change in light, the way someone might be untroubled by weather they had been expecting for a very long time. "The 4th sequence has begun," it said. "I assumed someone would come before now." Yala looked at the red light on the walls. She looked at the chair with its warning scratched into the floor. She pressed her comm with both hands and spoke clearly and precisely, because the situation had moved well past the point where careful word choice was optional. "Dross," she said. "I need you to get Director Sen. Right now. Not in a few minutes. Right now." Static. Then, faintly, his voice. "Yala. What's happening in there?" She looked at the red room. At the chair. At the ancient human object waking up around her like a sleeping giant becoming slowly, terribly aware of the morning. "Something just started," she said. "And I don't think it's going to wait for us to be ready." Director Sen did not sleep. This was not unusual for her. She had not slept properly in 600 days, not since she had taken the position of head of Council Special Projects Division, a job that came with no public title, no official office, and a filing cabinet so classified that only 4 people in the galaxy had the access codes. She had learned to function on short intervals of rest and large quantities of a hot bitter drink that her species called Veth and that tasted approximately like regret. Tonight she drank 3 cups and pulled every file the Council had ever collected on the inheritance. There were a lot of files. 600 years of observation produced a considerable amount of paper, even when most of that observation consisted of watching an object do absolutely nothing from a respectful distance. There were positional logs, material analyses, signal attempt records, theoretical papers written by scientists who had never actually seen the object, theoretical papers written by scientists who had, and 17 separate formal proposals to destroy the inheritance that had all been quietly shelved when the weapons teams confirmed that destroying it was not currently within the Council's capability. Sen went through all of it. She was not looking for anything specific. She was doing what she always did when a situation moved faster than her preparation. She read everything, cover to cover, and trusted that the relevant detail would surface if she gave it enough attention. It took her 4 hours. The document she found was at the very bottom of the oldest archive file, a folder so far back in the Council's digital storage system that it predated 3 separate archival format changes and had to be converted twice before it would open properly. The file name was a string of numbers that meant nothing. The document inside was 6 pages long. The top of the first page carried a classification stamp so old that the classification system it belonged to no longer existed. It was a translation. Specifically, it was the 17th translation of a fragment of text recovered from a dead human colony world approximately 3,000 years ago. The original had been written in an early form of human script. It had been translated into a series of intermediate languages as those languages were learned and then lost, each translation drifting slightly further from the original, the way a copy of a copy of a copy loses definition at the edges. The 17th translation was rough. Uncertain in places. Several sentences had footnotes attached explaining that the original phrasing was ambiguous and the translator had chosen the most probable interpretation without confidence that it was correct. But the meaning was clear enough. Sen read it once quickly. Then she sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she read it again, slowly, line by line, making sure she was not constructing a meaning that was not there. She was not. She stood up, took her cup of veth, and walked to the room where Dross was sitting in the particular way of a man who has been told to wait and is not good at waiting. She sat down across from him and placed the translated document on the table between them. "Read this," she said. Dross read it. His expression changed somewhere around the second paragraph. By the fourth paragraph he had put down the cup he was holding. By the end he was sitting very straight in his chair and looking at the document with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of a situation has just been quietly disassembled and rebuilt into a completely different shape. He looked up at Sen. "The 3 galaxies," he said slowly. "The Orion cluster. The pale meridian. The sunken arm." "Yes," Sen said. "They were not chosen randomly." "No," Sen said. "They were chosen because they were empty." Sen nodded once. "Evacuated. Over a period of approximately 400,000 years. Every living thing in all 3 galaxies, every species, every civilization at every stage of development, located, contacted, and relocated to other regions of the universe." The document describes it as the largest coordinated migration in recorded or unrecorded history. She paused. Humanity spent 400,000 years moving people out of 3 galaxies before they processed a single star. Dross looked at the document again. "Because they needed the fuel," he said. "Because they needed the fuel," Sen confirmed. She leaned forward slightly. 2.5 million years ago, she said, humanity detected something. The document calls it the continuous. It came from outside the known boundaries of mapped space, from beyond the edges of what any telescope at any point in history has ever been able to observe. Something enormous. Patient. Old in a way that makes the inheritance look recently constructed. She stopped. It consumed galaxies. Not processed them the way the inheritance processes them, not converting matter into usable energy with any kind of purpose. Just eating. The way a fire eats. Completely. Indiscriminately. Leaving nothing. Dross was very still. Humanity calculated its trajectory, Sen continued. They calculated its speed. They calculated the point at which it would reach the populated regions of the universe. She looked at the document. 2.5 million years from the point of detection. The number sat in the room. Dross worked the mathematics without meaning to, the habit of a navigator's mind, automatic and unhelpful. 2.5 million years ago. Which meant. Now, he said. Approximately, Sen said. Within the current window. Yes. Dross set both hands flat on the table. So humanity built the inheritance, he said. They evacuated 3 galaxies over 400,000 years. They used the inheritance to process 3 galaxies worth of matter into a concentrated energy reserve large enough to stop something that eats galaxies. He paused. And then they, what? Left it floating in dead space and hoped someone would find it. Not hoped, Sen said. She pointed to a line near the bottom of the 3rd page. The document indicates the inheritance was designed to wait. To monitor. To track the continuous across the full 2.5 million year approach period, refining its calculations continuously, and to activate when the approach reached a critical threshold. She paused. It was never meant to be found and operated by someone else. It was meant to operate itself. Then why does it need a biological operator? Dross said. Sen was quiet for a moment. That, she said, is the part that has been troubling me since Yala reported the voice. She turned to the last page of the document. The translation was roughest here, more footnotes than text in some places, words replaced by question marks where the translator had given up entirely. But the final paragraph was intact. Relatively clean. The translator had added a note saying the original phrasing at this section was unusually precise, as if the writer had chosen these particular words with great care, knowing they needed to survive a long journey through time and still be understood. Sen read it aloud. The device will not fire on a living galaxy. This is not a limitation. This is a choice. Humanity chose it deliberately and permanently, because what we built to protect life must never become a thing that ends it. The authorization sequence requires a living voice, not to operate the device, but to confirm that a living mind has read what is written here and understood what was sacrificed and why. The device already knows what to do. It has always known. It only needs to know that someone remembers why. The room was completely silent. Dross read the paragraph again himself, following Sen's finger along the lines. He looked up. It doesn't need an operator, he said. No, Sen said. It needs a witness. Sen looked at him for a moment. It needs someone to confirm, she said carefully, that the intent behind it is still understood. That whoever stands in that room knows that 3 galaxies worth of matter was gathered without harming a single living thing, and that the same principle still holds, and that the voice speaking on behalf of life in this galaxy understands what that means. Dross sat back. He thought about Yala. 23 years old, standing in a red-lit room inside a 2-million-year-old human machine, being asked whether she spoke on behalf of humanity. He thought about what that question actually meant now that he understood the context. It was not asking her for authority. It was asking her for understanding. His calm activated before he could say anything further. Yala's voice came through, the first transmission from inside the inheritance in nearly 4 hours. She sounded calm. Completely, almost unnervingly calm, in the way people sometimes sound when a situation has grown so large that panic has simply run out of room to exist. I need someone to make a decision, she said. The device is asking whether to proceed. A pause. And it needs an answer in 6 hours. Sen looked at Dross. Dross looked at the document. Outside, somewhere in the dark between everything, something vast and patient and ancient was still moving. And somewhere inside the inheritance, a 23-year-old scanner technician was standing in a red room with a 2-million-year-old voice waiting for an answer that would determine whether everything continued. Sen picked up the document. She read the final paragraph one more time. Then she stood up. 6 hours, she said quietly, to no one in particular. She said it like a person who has just realized that the most important conversation in galactic history is about to happen, and that the person who needs to have it is not a diplomat, not a scientist, not a council director with 600 days of sleepless experience in the most classified division in existence. It was a 23-year-old scanner technician who had raised her hand because nobody else did. Sen almost smiled at that. Somehow, she thought, humanity would have approved. The 6 hours began quietly. That was the strange part. Later, when historians tried to reconstruct the timeline of what became known as the inheritance event, they expected to find chaos from the first minute: sirens, emergency broadcasts, mass evacuations, the kind of loud collective panic that large-scale threats were supposed to produce. Instead, what they found in the records was something closer to stillness. A deep, spreading stillness that moved across the galaxy the way cold moves through water, slowly, completely, touching everything. The Council sent the alert through official channels first. Then through unofficial ones. Then through every channel that existed, official or otherwise, because the situation had moved past the point where protocol mattered more than speed. Every government was contacted within the first 40 minutes. Every major scientific institution. Every military body. Every species with a seat on the council, and several who did not have seats but had listening posts close enough to pick up the signal anyway. The message was the same in every language it was translated into, stripped of diplomatic softening, reduced to plain fact, because plain fact was the only thing that had enough weight to carry what needed to be said. An ancient human device has activated at the galactic center. It was built to stop an extinction-level threat currently approaching from outside known space. It requires confirmation before it can act. Confirmation must be given within 6 hours. We are working on it. We are working on it was doing a considerable amount of work in that final sentence. The debates that followed were the loudest thing the galaxy had produced in recorded history. The Theran Assembly, whose homeworld sat close enough to the galactic center to feel personally implicated, voted within the first hour to attempt a second destruction effort against the inheritance using their full military complement. The weapons arrived. They tried. The results were identical to every previous attempt: thorough, determined, and completely without effect. The inheritance did not respond. It did not defend itself. It simply continued to exist in the patient way it had always existed, and the weapons did nothing, and the Theran fleet eventually pulled back and joined the growing crowd of vessels holding position at a distance, which was all anyone could do. The Miravian Collective sent a philosophical delegation to argue before the Council that authorizing an action of this magnitude on behalf of all life in the galaxy required a vote from all life in the galaxy, and that 6 hours was insufficient time to conduct such a vote, and that therefore the correct course of action was to request an extension from the inheritance. Someone pointed out that the inheritance was not a scheduling system and could not be negotiated with regarding timelines. The philosophical delegation revised their position. The Dross watched all of it from the holding vessel on a screen that Pell had quietly patched into the Council's communication network without asking anyone's permission. Nobody told her to stop. Everyone was too busy watching. 3 species went completely silent within the first 2 hours. No response to any communication. No military movement. No council participation. Just silence. The silence of people who had looked at the situation, performed their own calculations, and made private decisions about how to spend whatever time remained. Dross watched their signal indicators go dark on the network map and felt something heavy and wordless move through him. At the 3-hour mark, Director Sen walked into the room and turned off the screen. "Enough," she said simply. She sat down across from Dross and placed the translated document on the table between them again. It was showing where now. She had been handling it for hours, folding and unfolding it, carrying it from room to room the way people carry things they are afraid to put down. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what the document says. About what the device actually needs." Dross waited. "It does not need authority," she said. "It does not need a vote. It does not need a council resolution or a military commander or a head of state." She looked at the document. It needs someone who understands what was done. What was sacrificed. And why. She paused. And it needs that person to say so out loud, in that room, to that voice. Dross looked at her. Yala, he said. Yala, Sen confirmed. She is 23 years old. Yes. She is a scanner technician on a salvage vessel. Yes. Dross was quiet for a moment. She raised her hand, he said finally. Not as an argument. Just as a fact that seemed, in this moment, to carry more weight than anything the council had produced in 6 hours of debate. Sen nodded slowly. She raised her hand, she agreed. Dross opened the channel to Yala himself. The signal was clearer now than it had been in hours, as if the inheritance had decided, with the deadline approaching, to allow proper communication. The red light in Yala's suit camera feed pulsed slow and steady in the background. Yala looked tired. Not frightened, tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has been alone with an enormous thing for a long time and has made a kind of peace with it. Yala, Dross said. I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen to all of it before you respond. Okay, she said. He told her everything. The continuous. The evacuation of 3 galaxies across 400,000 years. The fuel. The choice humanity had built permanently into the machine, that it would never fire on a living galaxy, that it would always wait for a living voice, not for authority but for understanding. He told her what the document said about what the voice needed to confirm. He told her what it meant. Yala listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Her suit camera showed her looking at the chair. At the warning scratched into the floor. At the red walls breathing their slow pulse around her. So it already knows what to do, she said. Yes, Dross said. It just needs to know that someone understands why. Yes. Another silence. And there is nobody better qualified, she said. Not bitterly. Just clearly. Stating a fact and examining it honestly. There are people with more titles, Dross said. There is nobody who has been where you are. Nobody who has walked those rooms. Nobody who has heard that voice and stood in front of that chair and read that warning on the floor. He paused. Whatever understanding it is looking for, you are the closest thing to it that exists right now. Yala looked at the chair for a long time. Then she turned back to the camera. Tell me the exact words from the document, she said. The final paragraph. I want to know exactly what humanity said about this. Sen leaned toward the comm and read it aloud. Slowly and clearly, every word. Yala listened with her eyes closed. When Sen finished, Yala opened her eyes. She straightened her shoulders, a small movement, barely visible, the kind of thing a person does when they are quietly deciding something. Then she turned toward the empty wall that the chair faced, and she spoke. Not into the comm, into the room. Into the warm red air of the space that something 2 million years old had made to feel like somewhere a human being could sit. I am not human, she said. But I have read what was written. I understand what was sacrificed. 3 galaxies emptied over 400,000 years so that nothing would be lost. Every living thing moved, every species found and carried somewhere safe, because the people who built this decided that protecting life meant protecting all of it, including the life that lived in the fuel. She paused. I am standing here because a human crew member raised her hand and walked in first. And I understand what that means too. She stopped. The red light pulsed. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then the voice returned, warm and unhurried as ever, carrying no urgency, no drama, nothing but the calm of something that has waited 2 million years and is entirely comfortable with however long things take. Understanding confirmed, it said. Reserve charge is sufficient. The continuous is within final approach range. Initiating terminal sequence. The red light shifted. Back to amber. Warm and slow and human-scaled, filling the small room like afternoon light through an old window. The chair sat in the center of it looking exactly like what it was, a place where someone had once sat, and thought, and decided something enormous, and then gotten up and walked away trusting that eventually someone would come and understand why. Yala stood in the amber light and breathed. Outside, nobody saw it happen. There was no flash. No shockwave. No visible beam of light cutting across the sky. The inheritance released what it had carried for 2 million years in a form that no instrument the Council possessed was calibrated to detect, because humanity had built it that way deliberately, aimed outward, away from everything living, traveling at a speed that made light look patient. On every monitoring screen across the galaxy, the inheritance simply stopped registering. Not destroyed. Not powered down. Gone. As if it had completed the only thing it had ever existed to do and saw no reason to remain. In the dark at the edge of everything, in the space beyond all maps, beyond all telescopes, beyond all the boundaries that any civilization had ever managed to push their sight past, something vast and patient and endlessly hungry encountered a single concentrated point of energy that had been building for 2 million years. And stopped. 3 days later, Dross sat in the bridge of Kethera's Reach, returned to them without ceremony, as if none of it had happened, and watched Yala run her standard scanner calibration the way she did every morning. She ran it quietly. Methodically. The way she always did. He watched her for a moment. "You could have said no," he said. Yala did not look up from her console. "So could the humans who evacuated 3 galaxies," she said. "They had 400,000 years to change their minds." Dross looked out at the stars through the viewport. Same stars. Same positions. Same cold and ancient light that had been traveling toward this window for thousands of years before any of them were born. He thought about a species that had looked at the future and seen something terrible coming and had not built a weapon first and asked questions later. That had instead spent 400,000 years carefully moving every living thing out of the way before they did what needed to be done. That had built a machine with one permanent rule written into its deepest structure. No living galaxy is a valid fuel source. Not because they had to. Because they chose to. He sat with that for a long time. Outside, the Valorian corridor drifted past, empty and dark and quiet, the way it had always been, the way it would continue to be long after Kethera's Reach was dust. Somewhere in that emptiness, 2 million years ago, a species had made a decision about what kind of thing they wanted to be. And then they had kept that promise across a distance of time so large it had no useful name. Dross leaned back in his command chair. "Set a course out of the corridor," he said quietly. Hell's hands moved across the navigation console. The engines groaned. The hull creaked in its familiar way. The coffee machine on Deck 3 remained broken. Kethera's Reach moved on. Behind them, the corridor was empty. But it felt, for the first time in 30 years of passing through it, like somewhere something good had once stood.